seminar. I'm very pleased to introduce you to Sam Woolley, who's coming to us from the University of Washington. We'll be presenting some work from a large ongoing project about the use of bots for political purposes. So I'll hand you over to Sam.
Thank you so long. Thank you all very much for having me, and I'm excited to be here. So like Solon said, I'm going to talk to you about a big research project that's been going on for a couple of years called the Project on Computational Propaganda, or CompProp. We just opened a new branch of this ongoing project at Oxford Internet Institute through a grant from the European Research Council. So we will be doing it for another 5 years, which is exciting, and I'm really happy. So like Solon said, my name's Sam Woolley. I'm the project manager of both the project, the Computational Propaganda Research Project at Washington and at Oxford. And this was originally envisioned my first year of my PhD as a sort of research paper, and we wrote a grant, and it kind of like blew up. And so we're studying something called political bots. And political bots are an interesting phenomena that have kind of risen up in the last maybe 4, 5, 6 years. They're a brand of social bot. Social bot was sort of first referred to by Pacific Social and Tim Hwang like maybe 4 or 5 years ago amongst a few other groups of people. So a basic definition of a bot is simply a software program that automates tasks on the web. So bots do all sorts of things. They scrape the web for information. They automate tasks for people in IRC chat rooms. They're functional in Google to a huge degree. Bots make up over 50% of traffic on the web. So automated software accounts make up most of the traffic on the internet. And around like 12% of action on Twitter is made up of bots. And those of you that are on Twitter will know that Twitter has a very sort of active and alive bot ecosystem. So bots are a very important part of Twitter in several ways. They propel jokes, they send out news. They are also used to send out marketing and spam and all kinds of other things, which Twitter tries to stop a little bit more. What we call a political bot is a bot that engages with other users on a platform like Twitter about politics, public policy, and things like that. So we've seen over 100 cases of bots in various countries, including the United States, be used to speak politics or to spread propaganda, I guess propaganda being in the eye of the beholder, on behalf of powerful political actors. And I don't say governments specifically or politicians specifically, because there's also situations where ISIS has used bots to spread propaganda, or lone hackers have used bots to spread political messaging, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, a first story, which is the Ecuadorian case. So my sister-in-law is from Ecuador. She's from Guayaquil. And she has worked in various nonprofits and is a very sort of tech-savvy woman. And 6 months or so ago, she called me and said, I've seen a lot of action on the internet that looks very suspicious surrounding Ecuadorian politics. And I'm not really sure what's going on, but I think these accounts might be bots. At first I was a little skeptical because it was my sister-in-law asking me about my research, but then I was really excited because it was someone other than an academic asking me about my research, which never happens, so I was also really happy. And I started kind of looking into this, and I noticed that, sure enough, there were lots of bots surrounding conversations about Ecuadorian politics. This was kind of like last summer. And the bots were being used to shut down activism, kind of what I like to call a gridlock bot. They were sending out thousands of tweets using hashtags of the Ecuadorian opposition parties that the opposition parties had been using to organize themselves. And so what these bots were functionally doing was stopping communication and organization amongst opposition political voices in the country of Ecuador. We did some more work and we did some tracking, and we were able to find out that a lot of these bots were being put out by a company that was financially supported by the Ecuadorian government. And so one thing we do know is that Mr. Correa, the president of Ecuador, has had a very, very active social media platform, and he has been basically fighting against anyone who speaks out against him in Ecuador. He's created a website where people can go to find tweets that are anti-Correa to respond to any kind of criticism against Correa online. And so bots are just sort of like an extension of this. The center where the bots are being created and launched also hosted a lot of basically people-run semi-autonomous troll accounts. Very like, many of you probably saw Adrian Chen's story about Russia. So this is kind of another situation where another government was using a troll center with semi-automated accounts and automated accounts in an attempt to manipulate public opinion of Ecuadorians. So that's one funny, interesting case, scary kind of, that leads us to a broad research question. What's the impact of political bots on public life? And I know this is a very broad research question, and the reason it's very broad is because these projects are so long, several years long, of longitudinal study. I wanted to mention a few recent political bots. They've been in the news a lot lately. Lots of you have probably seen Tay, the scandal about Tay, the bot that became a racist. And that's a really interesting case of a bot. Basically, it's a lot simpler than it seems, which is basically that Tay learns from people that talk to it and can actually repeat exactly what people said. Well, Tay is no more, but so Tay is one example of bots in the news, and I can't tell you how many people have sent me articles about Tay in the last week. I've gotten about 100 of them. Like, did you see this? I'm like, yeah, I did. Finally, someone knows what a bot is. Okay, awesome. This is another case. This is an interesting political bot case, and this is a bot that I see as a bot that's more of a commentary bot on the good side of things. It's called Deep Drumpf. Many of you probably saw the John Oliver show where he kind of called out Trump on his family's original name, Drumpf. A postdoc at MIT's Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence lab created this program, a bot, basically that tweets just like Trump. It does machine learning based upon several Trump speeches and his debate performances, and it is eerily like Donald Trump. It tweets very similar things, so, I mean, it looks just like a Trump tweet. I follow Donald Trump, so I know. And so this is an example of sort of a good bot, a recent good bot. Now, a few weeks back in Nevada, we had a primary. And we saw suddenly, after the primary, a lot of Twitter accounts that look like Latinos tweeting in support of Donald Trump. This is just a selection. They all tweeted the exact same tweets. They all had very low they followed many people. They had very few followers. And at a time when Donald Trump needs, I should say, support from the Hispanic community the most, suddenly we have a lot of Latino-looking, it was all pretty much men, funnily enough, tweeting, surprise, in support of Donald Trump. So this is an example of emergent bots during the presidential primaries that are tweeting in support of a presidential candidate that we can't necessarily connect to Trump. We're doing work right now, and we're tracking basically all of the tweets surrounding the presidential election that we can. And so I'm really excited to see the network analysis of this because it might show us something a little bit more interesting. But targeting a specific issue community here, or a specific racial community. And this is one of the first times we've seen bots being used specifically to target a specific community. And it just shows the perniciousness of this sort of technology. A lot of times people say bots are clunky, they can't really do much. But what happens when bots tweet at a community about a specific thing or person? There's 3 state cases I like to talk about. The 3 state cases are Venezuela, Russia, and the United States. My colleagues wrote a paper about Venezuela recently. It's just released openly on SSRN, I believe. And it was led by Michelle Farrell and Andres Monroy Hernandez and Phil Howard and Safe Savage all wrote this paper together. And they found that bots have a small but very unique and important role in Venezuelan politics. To wit, they're mostly used by opposition parties to tweet out messaging against the main party in Venezuela. And this is seen as kind of a prosthesis for the opposition parties in an attempt to spread their messages far beyond what they would normally be able to. But then we saw attacks back from some people in the main party in attempts to silence what's going on in Venezuela amongst the opposition, so it became a little bit of a bot war. A lot of people have heard about the Mexican case, where bots were used in Mexico by both the pre- and opposition parties, and it became this big thing where bots were fighting bots, and they kind of messed up the whole discussion about several different things on Twitter in Mexico surrounding Mexican politics. Well, Venezuela is sort of like another micro case of this. So one of the things we can draw from Venezuela is that repressive regimes, bots used for social control by strict regimes, but they're also used by opposition parties in compressed regimes to attempt to speak. Russia is a very interesting case. In Russia, during the Crimea crisis, we saw bots being launched all over the place. Bots being launched at Ukrainian newspapers, Ukrainian bots launching basically criticism of the Kremlin. One of the other things we saw was something very strange going on in the comment section of The Guardian. Basically what was happening was anytime someone would criticize Russia in The Guardian under an article about Crimea, there would be all of these people with very strange, very generic sounding names arguing against the people that had criticized Russia in very sort of like clunky terms and with kind of bad English lots of times in attempts to disrupt the conversation, not necessarily to say something poignant or to win people's opinion, but to just disrupt the conversation and make it spiral out of control so that no one was really able to have a conversation. We found that many of these accounts were bots. Mostly, actually, they were semi-autonomous. So they were run by both people and computers. They were tweeting, they were sending out messages on the comment sections autonomously, but then when people started to really attack the bot, a person would step in and start to type so that it seemed more legitimate. Can we hold till the end? Do you mind? Yeah. And then the last case is the case of the United States. So I mentioned the Deep Jump bot, and I mentioned the Nevada bots. We've seen the use of bots in the United States several times over the last 4 years. During the Massachusetts special election, after the death of Senator Kennedy, some supporters of Scott Brown used bots to attack Martha Coakley. They said that she was not Catholic. She wasn't Catholic enough. She was attacking Catholics, and Massachusetts has the highest number of Catholics in the country. These bots were chased back by some researchers at Indiana University who are doing some excellent work on this sort of similar stuff to a Tea Party group in Iowa that was supporting Scott Brown. We've also seen an interesting case of follower padding during the last presidential election with Mitt Romney and Barack Obama. Overnight, a couple students at OII, one of them a friend of mine, Devin Gary, found 100,000 followers started following Mitt Romney overnight. And basically everyone's like, what's the deal? Is Mitt Romney trying to look more popular than he actually is on Twitter? And there was basically a media storm around this issue. And the Romney campaign responded and said, this is like false. This is our opponents building bots in attempts to make us look bad, making us look like we're desperate. But then lots of people thought, maybe actually Romney bought the bots for $50 online, or his campaign probably more likely bought the bots for $50 or something. Bots are really cheap, by the way, on Twitter. You can buy 10,000 followers for $5 on Fiverr. If you're looking to look more popular on Twitter, that's why I only have 400 followers. I don't have any bots. But anyway, so this Romney case is a really interesting case, and since that, there's been basically this like trajectory of beating to death this idea that politicians have fake followers. Like, I'm so tired of seeing these stories. Yeah, politicians have fake followers on Twitter. We know this. This isn't as revolutionary of a thing, but what it is this kind of interesting vanity metric of saying what happens when people that are running for public office or that have public office look much more popular than they actually are. Like, we all know that we have bot followers on Twitter. I had someone add me yesterday, or I had like 4 people add me yesterday that were clearly bots. By the way, when you study bots want to speak to you all the time, but I get more bots now than I ever did before. speaking to me. So we know that that's a thing, but so fake follower numbers is kind of I think the less interesting side of this, but it's still very important to speak about. There's some implications of these three cases. So one implication is that bots are used for social control by strict regimes. We've seen this in Ecuador, we've seen it in Venezuela, we've seen it in Mexico. I could rattle off a lot of other countries that this has been happening in, where a regime either contracts a security company to create bots or builds the bots themselves and launches them against their own people in an attempt to dispel dissent. Bots are also a transnational phenomenon. The Russian case really shows us that governments or political actors in other countries are using bots in attempts to attack or manipulate public opinion elsewhere. Recently, and very interestingly, we saw bots tweeting about the Brussels terrorist attacks. And cursory research has shown that the bots are being deployed by supporters or members of ISIS. And they're sending out messages, basically trying to counter the public opinion on the terror attacks and in attempts to recruit as well. So here's another example of a very recent thing, terrible thing that's happened that is being propelled or interfered with by semi-automated or automated accounts. The third thing is that bots are used by political actors in democracies. We've seen them in the UK. We know they're in the US. We've seen them in Australia. South Korea has a very interesting case where the current president was accused by proxy of having bot supporters tweet for her, and the security chief who did that is now in jail. Another case. So they're quite pervasive. So one of the things we've done is kind of build a little bit of a bot typology. In April, I have a quick paper coming out on First Monday that's the first sort of half of this. And it's talking about the ways that bots have been used across many countries so that we can start to understand behavioral patterns and start to understand the way that they're being used. And so I break them down into two broad categories. One I call controllers, one I call facilitators. Controller bots fake, manipulate, and jam discourse. These are the ones we've been talking about in Mexico, Venezuela, even in the United States and UK. The first ones are propaganda bots. They actively send out information on behalf of one side or the other, or random side. So propaganda bots actively send out either information on behalf of the regime, but they can also send out attacks against the opposition. Follower bots are the ones we talked about that are a bit more mundane. So the fake followers of Hillary Clinton. They say that Hillary Clinton has over 50% fake followers on Twitter. Bernie has about 10%, and I think Trump has around 50 as well. Gridlock bots are used, for instance, in the Mexican case, to send out thousands of tweets, co-opting a specific hashtag. In Mexico, it was the Llame Canse hashtag, and to try to block conversation going on at all, trying to dissuade activists from protesting, sort of in the vein that we saw during the Arab Spring, so using a hashtag Tahrir Square or hashtag Cairo, hashtag Egypt, tweeting out thousands of tweets. basically had people create bots that spoke to anti-vaxxers to provide information about vaccines. And we ran a competition to see who would get the most retweets by anti-vaxxers and who could get them to follow them, and basically we wanted to see whether or not it could affect public opinion. We called it sort of like in situ experiment. It was very interesting. We're still doing writing on it, and we're still doing more things to do with this. One of the other things that we do is actively code, like sit by people as they code tracking mechanisms for bots. We were speaking about earlier, I was speaking to someone about how we can track bots and stop them affecting legislation or political processes. Well, this is one of the ways. We watch coders from all over the place, and we are building a bank of code. So research output, we're going to have the paper on the first 100 incidents. That should be coming out in the summer, I would guess. We have this original data set, which has over 100 cases in it now, which we'll share on the website, the politicalbots.org website, sometime in the near future, make it available to the public, and so that researchers like you can study this. We've been in talks with a couple people about doing an edited book of case studies. We're holding our first annual conference in Japan at the ICA conference in Fukuoka, and we have a bunch of really smart people coming together to talk about bots, and we're hoping that will grow into an edited collection of case studies. So we have people doing Russia, United States, West Africa, all sorts of things. We've also been doing civic toolkit briefings on bots. So recently I was at the National Endowment for Democracy, for instance, talking about bots and sort of trying to create an understanding of these things. I'm going to London in May for the emergency journalism movement, and I'll be holding a workshop at LSE with a bunch of policymakers there. We also did. We've also done some other mini conferences. We did a mini conference at Data and Society in December, and we got together 12 people, some journalists, policymakers, academics, and we produced Botifesto, or How to Think About Bots for Motherboard. I don't know if you saw that. It was kind of a fun piece to write, except for at the end they all gave me 500 words or something, and I had 6,000 words, and I had to cut it down to 1,000, and it took me about a month. Next steps. We're doing some work with bots in U.S. election law. We're doing this with Ryan Kalo and Lisa Manheim, 2 lawyers, and Bill Howard and myself. And we'll be presenting actually next weekend at Yale ISP and at the law school there about the ways that bots are being used to try to get around campaign finance laws. So bots are being used for emergent coordination in attempts to basically allow super PACs and candidates to coordinate behind the scenes so that they can send out internal polling data, which is illegal. And they've also been used for zombie electioneering, basically electioneering after the fact, all sorts of things like this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Look for this paper to come out sometime in the next few months. We're also doing a global inventory of cyber troops. We've had a lot of students coding multiple cases of governments building cyber troops. I think we have over 50 countries right now, and we'll be releasing that. It's a bit related to bots, but it's also something a bit tangential. Sometimes these troops use automation, sometimes they don't. Then, like I said, we're having our first conference in Fukuoka. I'm going to just say a little bit. I'm in my last year of my PhD, so I'm a PhD candidate right now, as well as doing the management of these projects. I'm doing my dissertation on bots in the U.S. election. So after we're done talking here, I'm going to get on a train to New York and try to go visit Trump headquarters and Hillary headquarters, and apparently Bernie headquarters now has an office in Brooklyn. Yeah, and probably Cruz as well because the New York primary is going on. And so I have some connections there, and I'm going to do this. I'm trying to build bot theory and catalog the recent bot history over the last 5 years, the long bot history, and talk about the U.S. elections and the methods for studying automated actors. I'm using fieldwork, basically. I'm interviewing the people that are making the bots for the campaigns and the people that are tracking the bots for the campaigns. And so right now I'm focused on parties and campaigns because we have the election going on. So I was just in Michigan for the primary there a few weeks back, hanging out with the Hillary campaign for 2 or 3 days, participating in the volunteer process with them, and I'll do the same with the Trump campaign in other states, and the same with the Cruz campaign in other states. We'll see how it goes. I might get chased away, but it's been going really well so far, and actually we've had some really interesting findings, which I won't share with you now, but I will share very soon. And the other active groups are journalists and civil society groups. So I'm going to, for instance, the New York Times Research and Development Lab to talk to them this week about the ways that they're launching bots on systems like Slack. The New York Times election bot, for instance, is a bot that people can interact with on Slack to get news about the elections. And then we're looking at civil society groups. So Planned Parenthood, National Rifle Association, lobbying groups, other groups that are using bots in attempts to affect outcomes in the presidential election, but also in legislation. So without further ado, this is our website, politicalbots.org. It's a little bit in need of an update right now, but we'll have a slew of articles coming up on there. So please visit, and we have the nominate a bot form on there. Not nominate a candidate, nominate a bot form on there. I'll try to make it live again in the next few days, and if you ever see political bots, let me know. Okay? Thank you. Yes.
That was a very cool talk, and I look forward to all your papers coming out. But I'm going to ask just something that focuses on one part of that, which is what you called the gridlock